Hey everybody, welcome to Perpetual Motion, a podcast for lifelong learners who share my passion for ongoing personal growth by improving their communication skills, relationships, finances, and wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mo Anderson, and my guest for this episode is Dr. Julie Pham. Julie is a Vietnamese-born, American-raised refugee, and among her countless accolades, she is a Cambridge-trained social scientist, organizational development leader, community organizer, and an expert on respect. That's right, RESPECT. And today, we're chatting about how to honor and respect others while remaining authentic with our own boundaries firmly in place. Now, this is news we can all use, right?
You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies the consequences of failure. What are you scared of? Why are you afraid? I'd rather live like I'm dying than live to die. Any day my heart is pure, my soul is safe.
Welcome, Julie.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast, Dr. Mo. I'm super excited to have this conversation with another lifelong learner.
Hey, I know. It's Nerd Patrol. My grandkids say Paw Patrol. I tell them I'm part of the Nerd Patrol, me and all the STEM folks, but I love it. It's just an adventure that never ends. And to that end, let's jump right in. I got a little pun thing going here. Anyway.
You're good at rhyming, by the way.
So you say. All right, anyway, enough of that. You do say the golden rule, for those not familiar with it, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Julie, you say the golden rule is wrong. How so?
So the golden rule, sometimes people don't want you to treat them the way that you want to be treated. Right? Because maybe you like to get a lot of constructive feedback unsolicited. And when you do that to them, they're like, I don't like that. I did not like that. Right? Or maybe, so that's the golden rule. And then there's the platinum rule, which is treat people the way that they want to be treated. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of the platinum rule, Dr. Mo?
I have.
So now the issue with the platinum rule is, what if they don't tell you? Or what if they're too embarrassed to tell you? Or what if they don't know? Or what if it depends? Or what if they tell you and you don't want to treat them that way because you don't like to do that? So there's what I call the rubber band rule. Okay. So I've got a rubber band here to illustrate. So with the rubber band rule, what it shows is that we as humans, we're flexible. We can flex according to what we think other people want because we want to show respect to other people. So Dr. Mo, you may like something and I'm kind of like ambivalent about it, but I'll do it because I want to be respectful to you. And then there are times where we're in settings with people who they want to be treated a certain way and we do it even though we don't really like to. You know what can happen? We're stretching. And you know what happens over time when we stretch too much?
It deforms. Yeah.
We snap and we break. We snap and we break like a rubber band. And so with this rubber band rule, it's about knowing what are my internal breaking points? What's going to make me snap? Because that's different for everyone. For some people, they are big, loose rubber bands like this. And it's like, ooh, I'm go with the flow. And other people are just, I'm a tight little rubber band. I got my boundaries. Don't push me. Right. And so it's not about saying be this way or be that way. It's about self-respect. And it's about taking the time to ask ourselves, how do I want to be respected? Why does that matter to me? Because we have to be able to articulate that to ourselves before we can share it with other people. So, the golden rule is just not always right. So
I understand it. And I like the way you explained it. And we've all had that rubber band thing happen too. And it can just ruin relationships because we haven't been ourselves and we've been stretched too much. So thank you for bringing the visual aids as well. A major challenge for most of us at home and work is navigating conflict. How do we do that and maintain respect for ourselves and others?
I think it's about practicing curiosity. And so I think of curiosity as a practice. A lot of times we describe it as an adjective. I'm curious. They're not curious, and usually what that means is like, I'm always curious, but other people aren't curious, right? And so that's that adjective. I actually think of curiosity like a verb as a practice, and I liken it to meditation. And so it looks really easy to be still Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to quiet our minds. And so if we think about curiosity as a practice, we can actually appreciate how it can be quite difficult. It can be really challenging, especially when our expectations aren't being met. And so you asked this question about how do we navigate conflict, right? And so sometimes what happens is we're assuming they're going to say this, and then I'm going to have to say this, and this is, and then sometimes, and so that either means I'm going to avoid conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to avoid conflict, or I'm just going to go in it and say, I've got to teach them, we got to straighten this out.
Right.
And I actually think a way to address it is actually with curiosity. And so the first thing is, so with disrespect, I actually differentiate between disrespect and lack of respect in the forms that matter to us. So disrespect is intentional. Dr. Mo, I don't like it, and you did it anyway. That was disrespectful, right?
Okay.
That's intentional. Lack of respect is maybe you didn't know. So maybe, for example, I did something that you thought was disrespectful, and yet I didn't know that mattered to you. And maybe you even said it wasn't a big deal, and I continued to do it because you told me it's not a big deal. And yet inside you're being stretched, right? And so there's this difference between disrespect and lack of respect. And so going back to this, how do we deal with conflict, is to pause and go like, am I assuming that they're intentionally doing this? Or do they just not know? And then how do I engage them in a conversation to understand their perspective? And so that actually takes pausing first. I have to pause first. I can't even go to asking them until I pause first, because I think we can stew in I was wronged, this feeling of like I was wronged. And what we don't ask ourselves is, why do I feel wronged?
Right. And that's a good transition into my next question is, we use the word respect so much, but like you just said, that can mean different things to different people. And I'm wondering, just for you, how do you define respect?
So I think we can agree on how respect feels: feeling seen, heard, appreciated, acknowledged. That's feeling respect.
Okay.
What we disagree about is, what does it look like? What are the behaviors and the actions? And that's what my book, 7 Forms of Respect, tries to get at. It's just like, oh, we're looking at it differently. How do we describe it?
Let's talk about the 7 forms of respect. Before we get into the content, I'd like to know, what did you experience or observe that led you to become more curious about the topic of respect? Did something happen to you?
Yes. So I remember having there was this epiphany moment, actually, when I was on a panel talking about leadership, and someone in the audience said, I'm trying to get my coworker to trust me, and I don't know what to do. I'm doing all these things, and he just won't trust me. And I said, well, maybe you're sharing all these things about your personal life, but what he really wants is for you to be on time to meetings. And that's what would get him to trust you. And then I was just, in a way, it's kind of like the 5 love languages, right?
Yes. I thought about Dr. Chapman's book as you were talking earlier. Yeah.
Right. And so that was kind of the epiphany moment. And then I looked at all of because I have a long background in community organizing, bringing people together from really different backgrounds. And then it started clicking, Dr. Mo. It's like, friction would always emerge, and people didn't have a way to talk about it. They would just say, I need you to respect me. It's like, well, I am respecting you. They're being so disrespectful. Right. And we're not talking about the particular behaviors. So there is the experience of community building. When looking back, it's like, wow, this really makes a lot of sense. Because I remember even I used to run lots of volunteers, actually. And there was an engineer and a labor organizer. And the engineer would ask these deep probing questions. Yeah. And the labor organizer was like, I got this. Why are you asking me all these questions? Right. And they had different ideas. So there's the community building. There's also my lived experience too, growing up Vietnamese in the US, being bicultural, then having lived in the UK, Germany, France, and Vietnam as an adult, and seeing that we have different expectations and different, and that can even be not just abroad, right? It could be the Pacific Northwest. You're in Dallas. I'm in Seattle, right? There's differences here. And then finally, once I started getting into the research, and I started asking people, how do you want to be treated? And then they kept bringing up the word respect. And that's when I was like, oh, let me dig in there. And that's when I realized that the rubber band rule. And I also saw there was a lot of there's a lot of nuance around respect, especially in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
There's hierarchy, right? There's about power dynamics.
Right.
There's actually a difference between the way we like to give respect versus the way we like to get respect.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also just being really honest with ourselves about what matters to us versus what should matter to us. So that's what makes respect dynamic. So those are some of the things that went into this
and I
framework.
love the idea of remaining curious and open and thinking about the why, because we do quickly jump to that you disrespected me thing and without having the conversation or even thinking about in what way or how might they perceive that. I'm going to use it as because, it seems like we're all stressed and in these high paced environments. And so you're already kind of on edge. So I think that lowers the bar for which, when you feel disrespected, if you think about this person over here is just as stressed out and overwhelmed as me, and it's not personal. They're just trying to exist. They are trying to survive. And that's a state a lot of us are in. And thank you for sharing some of your forms of some of the forms of respect and those concepts. And that's part of a book, right?
Yes. It's called The 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communications and relationships at work.
Outstanding. We'll drop that in the show notes as well. As I was preparing for this interview, I saw a prominent political figure on the news. She is a powerful, well-spoken, influential person, but I disagree with everything she says and how she says it. And I won't say any names. I'll just leave it at that. But at the same time, Julie, I find myself having this grudging respect for what she has been able to accomplish by seemingly not giving a damn about anybody, including her constituents. My question is, why should we respect anyone anymore when so many of our leaders and influencers have made incivility work for them, or so it seems?
Oh, incivility. That's
we can come back to it. It was a long question as well. Let's go to the workplace, where most of us spend the majority of our waking hours during the week. What is the role of curiosity in the workplace and on teams?
So it goes back to taking the time to try to understand not just the what, but the why, because people remember stories. And so, for example, oftentimes when we're taking teams through the 7 forms of respect and they say, oh, is this like Myers-Briggs? Is this like Enneagram? Do we go around and say what our respect styles are? Or even with the love languages, this is what I always like to give, or this is what I always like to get. And I try to get people to understand, well, it's actually dynamic. It's actually dynamic. It actually can change depending on the situation. And so a large part of this practicing curiosity is slowing down. It's just slowing down and making time to ask questions. 70% of people don't feel comfortable. They say they face barriers asking questions at work.
Barriers?
Yeah, they face barriers asking questions at work. And that might mean they might not feel safe asking questions. They might feel that that they're going to reveal that they don't know, or that they're slowing down things. And then also in that, leaders are making it, what are leaders doing to encourage curiosity? Because another stat is 83% of leaders think that curiosity is encouraged at work. Only 52% of individual contributors would agree with that. So there's this big gap in does curiosity actually exist at work? And so I think that the place of curiosity, it can lead to innovation, resilience, creativity, resourcefulness, and also connection. Because I mean, Dr. Mo, your whole show is about lifelong learning. When we admit we don't know and we're learning with each other alongside one another, then I think that actually creates a lot of connection. Because also another stat, people feel lonely at work. Yeah. People feel lonely at work. Another one, 58%
this is not just the remote people.
No.
In the office. No. So many are remote now. I want to clarify that that's just across the board.
No, absolutely. Like there was something I read, is that 58% of people who have 5 years or less of work experience feel lonely at work. Nearly 50% of people with 5 to 10 years of work experience feel lonely at work. We spend most of our waking hours at work.
Right.
And I actually think that work can be a place of continual learning. Learning doesn't stop at school. And if leaders actually don't make it into a place of that encourages learning, which means also encouraging, meaning when we don't know, then actually it feels work can be pretty extractive, right? It's just like, I just only want you for what you can bring, and we're not going to feed each other's souls by learning together.
I thought about, I took over a team, one place where I was a director. And I remember some of my initial meetings, and I try not to say too much because you don't want to keep people from coming out with their ideas or feeling that's the only way to think. But I was having such a difficult time getting people to share their ideas or feedback, constructive criticism. And I finally got one of the slightly more talkative ones into my office. I was like, what is the deal? And I learned that their previous manager would always tell them, don't ask dumb questions. And right. So that just kills all curiosity, all innovation. I don't believe there are dumb questions. You know, it's, if you don't know, it's not a dumb question. You need to know. Or if you have an idea, it's not a dumb idea. It might not work at this time in this space, or we might be able to collaborate and make it a better idea. But I think some leaders accidentally do that they shut down others' curiosity with what they say or their tone or their behavior. Can you give some tips? I'm just throwing this out there for leaders to get their teams to open up and really join in and be engaged in terms of particularly innovation and moving forward on new ideas.
So people do what you do, not what you say. Right. And so many leaders like, I'm encouraging curiosity. We need to have curiosity. And then they say things like, don't ask dumb questions.
Right.
Or they're not willing to ask the dumb questions. Right. The dumb questions. I remember when I was in grad school, there was this one professor who was highly esteemed, who was knighted, and he would always ask such simple questions that would be like, oh, how do you not know that? And yet, oh my gosh, he modeled that it's okay to ask. And it was like, well, if he can ask, then I can ask my questions too. And so I think that I think modeling, asking questions, even an acronym. What does that acronym mean? Because you know what people are doing right now? I'm going to Google it because I don't want to show that I don't know.
Right.
Right. And so I think that the modeling it. Also, another tip I like is sometimes the leader is the de facto, the facilitator of the conversation. I think it can be really helpful to rotate that role among a team.
I agree. Yes.
You know? And then to also invite the person who's the most junior to chime in first. So if the intern's in the room, hey, what do you think about this? And one last tip, I think, in terms of feedback is if someone's given a presentation, to go around and say, hey, I want each person to give a piece of constructive feedback and a piece of affirming feedback. And you don't get to give feedback unless you have both. And so let's just see who wants to go first. And that way it's everyone's responsibility to give both.
And I experienced that particular way of getting feedback for the first time a few years ago. I was at the American Dental Association, the leadership development thing. And that was the hardest thing because people do not invite you to give, constructive criticism, even if it would be helpful. And this was a room full of leaders, and we caught on, but it took a minute for us to be like, oh, we're going to hurt their feelings. We get into all of that instead of we want the final outcome to be good. And then being invited as well to say something positive, because some people stay in that negative space. That's all they want to do is criticize and not tell you anything good. And that shuts people down too. Nobody wants to hear that everything they say, there's something wrong with it, that it's not acceptable. So I love your answer on that. So back to my complicated question. I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. It seems like so many of our leaders now are, in my opinion, disrespectful, incivility, however you want to phrase it, toward one another. And these are leaders and influencers and throwing the shade and all of that. How do we see that and see these people in leadership positions and think, okay, I need to be respectful. I need to maintain that. Because I think a lot of people are influenced by seeing that. And so as a society, so many people are becoming so terribly disagreeable and disrespectful.
It's so interesting to think about, do I want the influence that they have? Or am I actually thinking about my own relationships? And so thinking about, if my goal is to be an influencer, and then if I'm controversial, then, and that seems to work. And yet because my goal is to actually have really good relationships with people. And so I think most people are not trying to be these influencers and if that's the case, then I think about what I can control.
Mm-hmm.
And what I can control is actually when I'm interacting with other people and I'm disagreeing with them,
Mm-hmm.
the question that I ask myself to pause is, because the first thing I want to do is actually to teach them something.
Yes.
And then I ask myself, am I willing to learn from this person? And here's the thing. If you were to ask that person, hey, do I think that politician there is willing to learn from other people?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's clear that they're not listening. So
Right.
do I actually want to follow them? Is that a role model I want to accept? And so, I think yes, it's working for them. And yet do I actually, as a lifelong learner, do I want to be like them? I guess that's the question I'd ask.
Great answer. And what outcome do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Great answer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Before we go, Julie, any parting words or advice in terms of respect, either in personal relationships or in the workplace?
Just remember, it's not about the what. It's not about, I care about punctuality, and Dr. Mo, you care about attention. It's the next part is to ask the why does it matter? And so a question I love to ask is, who in your life and what experiences have influenced how you think about respect? To be able to understand that and to be able to share those, and then to understand that if there are people influencing you, that means you're influencing them. You're influencing other people by what you do.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Julie, for those wonderful tips and strategies. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. And as I have with most of my guests, I have learned quite a bit that's actionable. And for that, I am very grateful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mo. I really appreciate your thoughtful questions.
Please tell listeners how they can connect with you and get your book and learn more about these concepts.
So you can learn more about my company at curiositybased.com. So that's BASED. And you can also go to formsofrespect.com to learn about my book. You can also get some Forms of Respect on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble. And also I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me there, we can engage there on social media.
Sweet. You are active on LinkedIn. I follow you and enjoy. I learn a lot from you that way as well. This has been another informative episode with news you can use today if you so choose. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more like it, go ahead and click subscribe to be notified weekly when new episodes are released. Please also like and share the episodes that make you go, Learn more about my books, speaker coaching, and availability to speak to your group on my website, drmoanderson.com. Until next time, be well and be safe. Thank you.